Well, I'm Michael Vogel. I am CTO of Fanaticus XR, based here in Atlanta, Georgia. And one reason why I'm here is because we have this game, which is up on Oculus App. Let's see how long the Oculus App lasts. Shall we?
Yes.
Go to the trailer? Do I do that, or
I got that.
Awesome. Cool. So that's our launch trailer for Take a Party, Hash It Out. We launched the game last year. Actually, I guess I should sort of do a mini intro here. The frame here is basically strategic. Why wouldn't you want to go to App Lab? And I think that it's a more complex question than it seems at first, for reasons we'll get into. I guess. Oh, I must have put these out of order. That's right, that's my mistake. No wonder. Just for a bit of context here, we put Hash It Out into early access on Steam in March and took it out of early access in November. And it went onto App Lab initially in July of last year. And that timeline is somewhat important to get to that part a little bit later in the presentation. So, why do I say that it's a bit more complex than it might at first seem? Because if you just go out there and look at what it has to say about, oh, here's Oculus Quest Store, here's the App Lab, you might think, oh great, it's this, just another channel, essentially. You put your game up, you make money, you meet the requirements, you do marketing, etc. And it just kind of seems like an alternate distribution channel. But if I may inject a bit of my cynicism into the analysis of Oculus App Lab, kind of a anatomical diagram of the whole situation here. I know there's a lot of symbolism around Dr. Seuss and stuff. It's not really that deep, so please don't read into it. Essentially, how I have come to see Oculus App Lab is as a release valve, essentially, for Meta. That there are developers making stuff, and Oculus, says, here you are, not to, demonize them, because this is, it's all sort of very complex. There's no individual person who's doing this in a kind of underhanded way or anything, but in effect, what it is inviting developers into a system where you have the official Oculus Quest Store, which is kind of what everyone wants to go to, right? I think they actually have 300 plus titles now, but it's sitting around 200 for a very long time. And then, up here we have maybe about 1,000. I think a few months ago it was like 800 something, so I'm sure it's probably more than 1,000 now. And the reason why they have this kind of forking system is because what they're trying to build is not, they're not trying to make PlayStation, they're trying to make a Wii. And what I mean when I say that is I'm not talking about hardware, I'm not talking about any of the, mechanics of anything we're talking about the audience that they're trying to build for, right? They're trying to make something that is a mass, has a mass audience as broad as possible, ages, genders, etc. And this is their notion of how to do it. So yeah, and then the kind of effect of this system you see over here is that a small number of people make money, and essentially the network effects and the kind of ubiquity of Facebook makes it so that is kind of the primary way to make money through Oculus. Oculus essentially. That does not mean AppLab is not worth pursuing. So there are plenty of reasons to go through AppLab, and I absolutely would not warn anyone away from it. What this is kind of a call to be strategic about what it is that you're trying to do before you invest resources into it. I think probably some of you are familiar with this, but among the benefits are you get to put something in front of people and get feedback. It's through very official looking channels. You'll be much more interested in going to an AppLab page and downloading your thing than they would to a Google Drive link. They don't decide anything. Yeah, it's more trustworthy. It is a high trust environment. You can see that it is an Oculus URL. Seamless delivery of updates. Very official looking page, posted on Oculus.com for now. You can make sales. You can make sales, but they'll be driven solely by marketing basically. Be getting into that later. And SideQuest has a widely convenient as the main driving force that sends people to Oculus AppLab. So again, keeping it short, this is our last slide here. How I would recommend using AppLab. If being an Oculus store, the Oculus Quest store is not your eventual goal, then you are good. Just, even just going with the kind of rhetoric that's like the official line of like Meta, Quest, AppLab is a place for independent developers to go and put out your thing and kind of don't think any harder about it. There's tons of opportunity. You can make your game, you can get it to people, you can sell and make money and have your payments processed, and it really does take care of a lot of things for you. I would say in this scenario, what you want to do, really in both of these scenarios, but certainly in this first scenario, is make the most of SideQuest. They offer a lot to people who register as developers, and they as soon as you're on there, they send you, as soon as you register as a developer in their system, they have a laundry list of ways that you can promote through their systems and ways that they will signal boost you and basically make it work for you. So, and even if you are not shooting for the Quest store, use the Oculus VRC list, which I think we'll also be getting into that later, technical side. But if your ultimate goal is to get onto the Oculus Quest store, I want to first point to this lowest bullet point, which is about metrics. There are key metrics that they care the most about if you're trying to get on the Quest store. You need 72 or higher FPS. They have a general expectation that people will spend about an hour. I'm sure more would be preferred, but that's what they tell you is that they want an hour per play session. And traction, which is, just to put it in rudimentary terms as an equation, sales versus amount of time on store. So for this reason, going back to an earlier slide, not to belabor the point, but if you are trying to get onto the Quest store, don't do it while you are testing, don't do it while you're in active development and be putting out updates over time, which presumably, if you are testing, actively developing, is not going to be a time when you are investing in marketing. then you want to basically time things either such that you have a release that you are marketing and stuff when it goes onto the official Quest store, or you could relaunch your game at a later date, which could be a way of gaming this time on store metric, because then you don't have something that you've been developing and putting in updates that that counts against you. So again, if you're shooting to get on the Oculus Quest store, use it as a testing ground, not as an early access replacement. Frame it as a vertical slice, demo, whatever you want. Reach out to Oculus Dev Relations to discuss possibilities. And after this, I would say that just like any other attempt at publishing games, it becomes a matter of biz dev. And when I say biz dev, I mean talking to essentially business people or publishers or other funding entities and making a case for why you're thinking of making money, which is what all these conversations really come down to. So that's kind of the sequence that I would say. One of the points that I want to point to is to join Oculus Start as soon as you're able to do that, because there are benefits. You get plugged into the network and you can get them to help you solve technical stuff, and it's always nice to get more Oculus folks that you're in contact with and can call to discuss things when you need to. So that's about all I've got to say strategically. How you should approach it. Hope it wasn't too difficult.
Hi everyone, I'm Sean and I work with Vertical Shift. We make virtual reality esports such as this game right here. Awesome. Yeah, so we launched Vertical Shift on App Labs in December last year. And so what I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit today is what that process was like, and maybe share a couple of horror stories that were involved along the way. So the key kind of points I wanted to cover is the timeline of submission, the requirements that you have to resolve before you submit, and then the privacy policy that's required for your game. So the very first question is, when do I start the submission process? And really, you want to start it as soon as possible. I know when we were submitting to App Labs, we wanted to wait until the game was ready and perfect before we even began the process, and we found out that we quickly ran out of time and we're almost going to have to move our release date. So it's really, really important that you don't wait when it comes to starting that submission process, but you actually want to start it as soon as possible. And I'll get into a little bit of what that means. Yeah, so at the end of the day, even with us, we kept kind of pushing off starting the submission process because, like I think most people, we're running into a lot of issues with the game. We want to submit this perfect build to Oculus and show them that we made a kick-ass game. And eventually we ran out of time and we just kind of submitted a broken piece of trash and somehow it got approved anyway. And so it's really a valuable lesson to kind of learn from that is that as long as you meet the VRCs, they don't really care what your game is. And what's more important is that the approval process when you first submit can take up to 4 to 6 weeks. And so, this isn't like a try to turn it in the day before kind of problem because you're gonna have a bad time. But the nice thing is that if you do start the submission process super early when your game is still a buggy piece of crap, you can just kind of keep submitting new builds after you've been approved, and they're going to go onto the store, or they're going to go onto their distribution channel a whole lot faster than that initial 4 to 6 week process. And so it's going to be a lot easier if you just kind of give them a crappy build, get through that process, and then worry about your launch after that. So pretty much as soon as you pass all of the requirements is when you want to start submitting your build. No matter how good your actual game is, the requirements that they provide are the only things that they're really checking for when they reject your build. So what are those requirements? Oculus calls them virtual reality checks, or VRCs, but really they're just the technical requirements that your game has to meet before you can submit and get approved onto their store. So really, you can kind of expect the VRCs to be pretty common things that you would expect. You need to have optimal performance, in which case for App Labs, the minimum is 60 frames per second. The game has to be stable. You can't have crashes or soft locks left and right, or else they're going to reject you. And then you need to make sure that you have all your metadata in order. So if you're using the internet, you're using a microphone or anything like that, you need to make sure that you have the proper permission requests when people launch the app. However, when we were going through the submission process, we ran into a couple of gotchas, kind of checks that we weren't really expecting and caught us off guard. And it also slowed down the whole process because, again, 4 to 6 weeks. And that's honestly almost every time they reject you, it's like almost another 2 to 4 weeks before they'll come back to you. So the biggest gotcha we ran into is that your trailers and screenshots cannot depict other VR platforms. So as y'all might have saw when you were watching the trailer, we had this little guy right here at the end of our trailer. Oculus said no. And we had to quickly go back to our video editor and ask them for another render of the trailer without the Steam logo before they would let us launch onto App Labs. So that one makes sense in hindsight, but it's such a small detail. Like we were just like, it's cheaper to make one trailer, let's just throw all the brands on there. And Oculus was like, no. So definitely need to make sure that you're paying attention to all the store page content requirements because those will trip you up. The next one is the launch. So naturally, as you can expect, when you're in a VR headset, it's pretty important that when you look around, you can look around inside the game as well. If there's any kind of disconnect, you're going to have a bad time. And this is one of the requirements in their VRC list as well, is making sure that when you're launching the game, you only have about 4 seconds of hang time before you have to have something on screen, something tracking, or else they will reject your build. It isn't really hard to solve, but it's one of those things that just gets swept under the rug and you don't really pay attention to, especially when you're a developer who's launched your game 1,000 times. And then lastly is your privacy policy, especially if you don't have any legal consultation. This is going to be the lowest thing on your radar when you're trying to get your game ready for launch. But it is incredibly important, especially again if your game is online or if you are requiring any of those permissions I was talking about before. You need to make sure that you're making your users aware of what information you're collecting and how it's being used. Largely just because Oculus will reject it if you don't. And also worlds or something like that. So we talked a little bit about kind of what is required for privacy policy and how you can get one made. So there's really 3 main things just based on the VRCs that Oculus requires for your privacy policy. They're pretty much what you would expect. You need to explain what the data you're collecting. You need to explain how that data is being used. And you have to be able to explain where that data is being stored and how it can be deleted if that's an option. So next is really how do you get a privacy policy, because you could hire a lawyer. In fact, I know someone who did, but I'm sure that was not a cheap process by any means. Certainly not one that I could afford, and that does say lawyer. But meant lawyer. And you could also look into writing one your own, just based on the 3 bullets that I listed. As long as you have very clear and concise phrasing, it's really not that hard to write up one. And what's the worst that can happen? They just reject it. You just try again. But what we ended up going with is free generators online, because they give you all like the professional wording and phrasings if you went straight to a lawyer, except it didn't cost you a dime. And they also host it on their domain for you, so you don't have to worry about the hosting fees as well. So there's a couple different options available, but we did freeprivacypolicy.com, and it worked out pretty well for us. And sorry for using the same meme twice. But yeah, so that's all I really got to talk about today. Thank you guys.
Hi, I'm Amy Stout. I'm the creative director at Amebous Labs, and we are working on a game called Loam Sandbox. Hey there. Loam Sandbox is available on Oculus Quest App Lab now. So we published our app in January. So we've been out for about 6 months now. So I want to talk to you about game marketing and in particular the parts that you can't find online. So I've done a ton of research. I have experience in marketing, and there were just some things that you could not find online. Maybe some of the information's out there, but I wanted to share some learnings that I've come across over the past 6+ months, because game marketing starts well before your game goes out. So to get started, the most important piece of your marketing will be your product display page, which is essentially just your store page. So your Oculus store page has all the information about your game, and that's going to be the last thing that your players see before they press purchase. So before they say, yes, I'm willing to give you my money or willing to give you my time, if it is a free app, they need to see this and be convinced, like, yes, I want to do it. So this is what it looks like on the back end before you submit your app. If you have submitted an app via Oculus before, you're very familiar with this page, I'm sure. But this is the app metadata, so again, all the information that goes on the store page aside from the actual build. So you have 6 different categories or sections that you have to fill out. So your name and your description of your game. You have your specs, which include, is it a room scale app? What languages does your app support? You have details. You have assets, which is going to be all of your visual aspects of your game marketing for your page, your content rating, and pricing. So the section that caught me up and made me spend the most time on was the asset section. So I wanted to go through some of that just to give you some tips that I've learned that can hopefully save you some time and some headache in the future. So cover art, you probably, if you've created an app before or a game, you know that you have to have so many different versions of your cover art. So keep that in mind from the get-go, because you will need different sizes and aspect ratios. You need a landscape, portrait, square. You'll notice that there are two landscapes there that are very similar but different, and one of them does not have a watering can, and it is because it kept getting cut off because this one's displayed in headset and in your store page. You're basically just trying to create assets that can be responsive enough to account for mobile, desktop, and in headset. So the other one that I want to bring up is I have 2 square pieces of cover art, and one does not have the watering can, and that's because it was a teeny tiny thumbnail and you would never be able to see it, so why include it when I can make everything else larger? So I won't go into, you can find stuff online about making cover art, but it's just something that I got caught up on. I would love for you to know ahead of time that you need to be aware of all the different sizes that you make, and these sizes are just the ones that go into Oculus. That doesn't account for Steam pages if you're on Steam, and it doesn't account for side quests or any other promotions that you do. So you will be touching this cover art very frequently, so get comfortable with it. Next is going to be our screenshots. So screenshots tell you the story of your app. And with Oculus, they require you to have 5 screenshots. They all have to be very high quality. And these 5 are the ones that we've chosen for the initial launch of our game. These will be changing as we go through development because things change. So for instance, there's a shed, actually I'll use this one as an example. There's a communication console right here, and we've changed the look of it that with the new release that's coming out this week, so I have to change that screenshot. But be aware that this is ever evolving and will be updated frequently, so don't get too attached to them. But remember to think about what aspects of your game really draw your players in and what they would find exciting to see, because again, this is going to sell your game. So I'll give you one example here, the one in the center. When we were doing play testing with some of the people who volunteered to play test with us, we heard audible gasps from people when some of the critters showed up. So we went, we need to show that in one of our screenshots because that's what gets people excited. So talk to your players and think about what are the most exciting parts of your game that will sell it and be quintessential while they're playing it. So here are the requirements. You need 5 screenshots. It needs to be in a 16:9 aspect ratio and a 2560 by 1440 resolution. I know that sounds super boring, but my point is pictures taken in headset are 1440 by 1440. That is a 1:1 square ratio, so you get something that looks like this is too low res for Oculus to accept it. So you have to have a workaround. So going back to these pictures, we have the aspect ratio of 60:19, and they are high res enough. And how we did it was I worked with our director and we hooked up the headset to her computer and took screenshots on her PC to get high quality enough pictures. And Oculus does not tell you this in any of the documentation. You have to kind of figure out a workaround for yourself, which is a little bit frustrating because you think taking pictures in headset where people are going to experience will be good enough, but it's not. So, yes. Next part I want to talk about is discoverability, and I have a little asterisk here. So this information applies to games on App Lab because all the information you're going to find online is about Steam or the Quest official store. So this applies specifically to App Lab because discoverability is almost non-existent. So you will never, if you are on App Labs, you will never be found on the Oculus Quest store page. So sad. You'll never get a beautiful banner like lost it. So how people find you on Oculus.com, soon to probably be Meta.com, who knows, is they search in the search bar your name exactly, your game name exactly. And then they come up with results that look like this. And guess what? You have a bunch of apps that are Quest official, and then you have this little section down here. You might need to zoom enhance to see it, but if you click, you see that little view app button, and your app comes up. So I think the most baffling part to me is I'm like, why are these games showing up? None of them are named Loam or Sandbox. So I clicked into them, and all of them have Sandbox somewhere in their long description or in their keywords. So Quest official games can have up to 5 keywords. So if any of them match your game name, you have to, I guess they'll show up. So I did some other research before this just to see, and if you search fighter or gun or draw, they all come up with about 90 to 100 other apps before it gets to App Lab. So I guess naming your game for search, my advice would be do a search on what you'd want to name your game and see what else you're competing with, because although you may not be competing directly with them, you need people to scroll past all of those apps before they get to App Lab. So be aware of that, and Sean talked a little bit about VRCs, but they have VRCs for publishing as well, which is kind of like the app metadata portion of it. So this one says the name must be unique and you can't just keyword stuff it. So name it, appropriately. There's again a ton of stuff online on how to name your game, but just some tips for search is to have it easy to spell and memorable. So try not to do any weird spelling where you take out a vowel here or there. Like just spell it how it would be in the dictionary. That would be my advice. And then how do you direct people to your game's page? So we can't expect everyone to want to search your full name of your game every single time. It takes a lot of steps. I think that it was about 4 steps to get to purchase if you went through the store page. So the number one way to do that is through direct links. And I've listed a few places that you should definitely have your game listed as a direct link. So your game landing page should always direct straight to the store page. Don't try to guide people on how to use the search function. The Quest it's useless. Social media, of course, post it on all of your social bios and make it known where they can find the game, because people, if they're interested, they want to buy it, they don't want to search for it, they just want it. Emails, if you do email blasts, or if you don't do that, you want to add it to your email signature. That's a fun way to send it out to everyone that you communicate with. Events, every event that you go to, you should have QR codes or some way for people to find your game in an easy manner. Media outreach, so if you do any press outreach, make sure to send a link to the press people so that they can share it with their following. And then the other biggest thing that you can do for game discoverability is listing sites. So I've listed 3 different sites, so SideQuest, AppLabDB, and Oculus App Lab. Those are 3 easy things that you can do to just get listed on all of those sites. The last 2, all you need to do is submit your URL and you'll get listed, and people can go to those sites and search for different types of games that they want to play, and there's some discoverability. And then SideQuest, you can actually make your own store page, you can post your own updates. It's been really awesome to see the traffic that we get from there, because it's going to be people that you don't necessarily know personally that are going to find you through those platforms. So in practicing what I preach, this is an event, so here's a QR code to our game page.
Thank you all so much for those presentations. That was amazing content. I know the audience here is loving this, so let's keep it going. So I know you talked about, photos for the store, and we got to see all of your trailers. So can each of you give a little bit of lessons learned on capturing in-game footage? Because I know that can be tricky. Amy, could you start?
Yes, I will start. So I captured all of our trailer footage in headset, which sounds crazy. I know that you guys probably did it in engine, like you used your computer. We did not. We decided as a team that we wanted to show footage in headset, one, because I could record it by myself, so the resources where I was available to do that, whereas our developers were working on the game at that particular moment, and marketing does take up a lot of time. And the other reason was that we wanted to show the game as it was going to be in headset. We've seen a lot of games previously use art that wasn't the style of the game at all, so we really wanted to stay true to the style of the game. So we decided to record in headset, which was a challenge. The biggest lessons that we learned was recording higher quality footage. So I used side quests to change my settings within the Oculus Record. So you can either run ADB commands to change the quality of footage that you get, or you can go into settings when you're hooked up to side quests and change full rate capture, so you're going from 30 frames per second by default to 60 to 72 frames, which gives you a little better video, and then also change the size of the capture to 1080, and that gives you the appropriate size and dimension for the requirements for the trailer. So it gives you the 16 by 9 instead of the square footage. So I learned that the hard way. That was kind of trial and error on my part. So I learned that. And then we also set up a little steady cam. So if you ever try to record footage in headset, you get like this jostling back and forth. And it's because your head makes micro movements that you don't even realize happen. So your footage can be a little bit shaky. So we've fashioned
You show and tell?
I do, yes.
Okay, let's do it.
Actually, don't have the headset with me right now, but I will show you. So I have
Can you stand here so the camera
Yes,
can see
of
the
course.
frame?
So I have a light pole here that has a few points of articulation. And what I did was I created a stand for the headset to sit on. So I have a T bracket and L bracket that I put together with some screws. And then I have some zip ties here, which actually go around the arms of the Quest headset. And then I have a fancy rubber band, which is what keeps the headset from falling to its eternal doom. So I fashioned that all together so that the headset sits right here, and then I can record doing this. You do have to kind of like look through it, but it works. It's way steadier than having it on your head. So I would have loved to buy something like this, but I couldn't find anything for the headset, so maybe someone can create one.
Maybe it's time to pivot.
I know, maybe.
Great, well, let's give Amy a round of applause for her show and tell. All right, Michael, any tips for capturing footage?
Yeah, so I would say we were both, well, we had more high-tech and more low-tech things that we did. I would say the high-tech thing that we did was going for live-action production, which is not a requirement for trailers by any means. In fact, I have I have some commentary I'd like to make about kind of like live-action picture VR trailers too, but just about the question of capturing footage. We did most of it in-engine, in Unity, which is what we use, using a tool called Cinemachine, just setting up camera tracks. And it's kind of, if you can imagine the virtual equivalent of dolly shots of just, setting up cameras, basically. And a combination of that and not having a contraption like that, holding the headset with one hand while I hold the controller with the other hand out here, going into the very corners of my office and trying to set things in different places, and then go to my computer and hit the hotkeys. It was great. And then, yeah, we're very fortunate too that Ernesto's brother does work. Ernesto's CEO of Fanaticus XR. His brother does video production work, so he's able to put together great production for us there. So if anyone needs that kind of work done, we can have to talk to.
Yes. It was a beautiful trailer, and like I know especially because your game does leverage mobile devices in addition to the VR headset, it was great to see live action people outside the headset and interacting in that way.
Exactly.
It was a great
Yeah.
trailer.
Thank you. Yeah, and very necessary for others. Because otherwise it's very hard to
Yeah.
convey that.
We were talking before, I think even you showed up about how we're like in this section between like everyone having a headset and no one having a headset. So when someone goes to a house where one person has a headset, what do you do if you want to play VR? So I think Potato probably is a great use for that. Yes. Wonderful. Okay, Sean, I know you do, of course, your trailer, but also streaming and other videos. So what do you typically do for in-headset footage?
Yeah, there were kind of two key things we ran into as issues a lot when we were first starting out. One of the first things is that when we're recording footage inside the headset and you come back and look at it on a 2D screen, your field of view is, for some reason, a lot smaller than you expect it to be. And so a lot of stuff that you thought was in the recording just ends up totally cut out. And so as an actual feature of our game, we have a separate camera that's designed literally to draw to 2D instead of VR that actually has a kind of an artificially wider field of view so that when you are capturing footage on a 2D screen, it kind of ends up representing almost one-to-one what you're looking at in the headset, and it will kind of make a lot more sense than that kind of zoomed in video that you normally get just from a raw VR capture. The second thing is paying attention to what you're doing with your hands, especially with vertical shift, and I imagine many other games. When you're recording that first-person perspective, your hands are just kind of going all over the place, doing things that hands do, and it is impossible to understand what you're looking at when you're watching the video because you see the hand, but then the hand's gone, and you don't know what the hand is doing. And so anytime we had people filming in VR, we would have to very explicitly tell them to keep their hands in front of them at all times. And like when they're recording, they look and feel ridiculous because they're doing everything like this. But when you're watching it in the video, it makes so much more sense. You can kind of track the hand through the screen and kind of follow what the player is doing instead of it just kind of jumping around sporadically.
Yeah. Wow. Great advice. I feel like that would be extremely awkward, but definitely good, especially if you're streaming or recording footage for a video. No, I know we heard from Amy, side quest has been a huge thing. I guess I want to hear if it's been the same for both of you, or if you've had other successes with different discoverability platforms. Sean.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You probably have the biggest audience out of all of us.
So yeah, I'm definitely a different case study from the rest of y'all, considering vertical shift launch for free. But SideQuest specifically has been huge in discoverability and driving players to our App Labs page. Naturally, just with the game being free, for starters, it shows up in all the free games tabs, which is a separate driver from most other experiences. As well as the fact that when a YouTuber or a streamer will start talking about us, almost all of their audience can just pick it up instantly. They don't really have to think about it much more than that. And so you have a much lower barrier of entry. Now, of course, you have the other issue of that. You have to find another way to make money. But in terms of discoverability, launching a free game on SideQuest will definitely solve a lot of your problems.
Great. Michael, how about you? How have you acquired new users for your game?
Yeah, I would say SideQuest is probably, when you're on AppLab, SideQuest really is the best. It's the largest funnel, basically, that gets people to your game. We have had people stream and make videos of it. Some of that we've dabbled in soliciting videos and streams through Catapult and some other platforms where people will make content for money with mixed results. And also through just personal outreach, and then some other people have picked it up just on their own, and that obviously drives people to it because when they see, you know. I would say there's a spectrum there of most obvious that it was paid for to least obvious that it was paid for, and unsurprisingly the least obvious that it was paid for, and that spectrum is the one usually that's more engagement. But you can have wins and losses on both sides, I would say. But yeah, really I would come back to kind of side quest and also just the social channels that they push.
I know you preach side quests in your marketing
Yes,
discoverability.
I know.
Anything else? Anything else here? Is that's
No,
the winner?
I think that's it. I think SideQuest should give me some money for pushing it so hard.
Sounds like side quest is the winner. All right. Well, I know. So once people have purchased or downloaded the game, is there a particular way that you are capturing feedback? Michael, how about you?
Through our Discord, some. So, you know, that's been, I guess that's a pretty important one. It's one we have not really pushed very hard. You know, we have a pretty modest Discord, but that is really, you know, in terms of owned media, just, you know, places that are totally under your control. That's an incredibly powerful one. We've even reached out to people, recently we reached out directly to people, which I think it's controlled enough that it's not too weird for us to actually just directly ask people and get feedback that way.
Great. Amy, Discord for you?
Yes, same Discord. It's been the easiest way to talk to people because it can be asynchronous, but you can also have a conversation in real time. So it's nice because you get to connect with your players that could be all over the world. We have a player in Canada, and she has given us a ton of wonderful feedback. She's now one of our play testers because we've had so many conversations with her. And I think being able to have that open line of communication and being responsive and respectful for their opinions has been a game changer for us.
I know specifically when you get feedback, you have a way of tracking it for the public. So what have you been using?
Yes, so whenever we get feedback, we put it into, or any kind of player suggestion where it could be something actionable that we could change in the game, we put it into our public Trello boards so that they know they're being heard and they are actively assessing whether or not it should, or I guess we have the capabilities to put it in the game, the resources, and they can see like what's coming up next. And it's been neat because we've already put a couple of the players' feedback and suggestions into the game, so you can see that in the done column so people know we're listening and we want their feedback.
And Sean, any other tips about player feedback or how you're capturing it with such a large user base?
Discord's definitely like an excellent platform for that. The other kind of two things is we have a lot of drivers to leave reviews built inside of the game, so we get a lot of feedback directly through Steam and Oculus reviews. And then we are currently working on building analytics into the game as kind of an automated way to collect feedback, and we just recently started a kind of a report form that people can fill out, but that's largely for reporting issues with users and player base, but as well as any kind of like technical issues and stuff like that.
Wonderful. Yeah, I guess with a multiplayer game, moderation and all of that is a whole another can of worms. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. We've moderated it pretty well in the Discord so far, but we're just now kind of getting to the point where we need to kind of actually do stuff in the game and give people a way to report from within that system.
Yeah. And this is really just a broad question for all of you, if anyone has anything to add here, but how do you evaluate the feedback that you get from the consumer? How do you decide if it's worth acting upon, or, you know, we all have limited resources as indie developers, so how do you weigh those decisions? If anyone's welcome to take that one.
We do a more of a decision matrix, what's going to be, how much resources and what sort of impact will it have on the game. And we also look at what it could potentially do to things like frame rate or the quality and overall objective of the game and see if it fits with our vision. And if it does, we go ahead and add it in. Maybe it's something that we want to do down the road, but we always look at it and have many meetings where we sit and talk about it for a while. So we do consider everything, but we really have to look at what is the cost and the value of it.
Any other things that go into making those decisions, Michael or Sean?
What we do is actually sounds relatively similar, but we keep a spreadsheet where we rank everything based on priority, complexity, and then it auto sorts based on the average of those values. So anything that's immediately actionable and has impact rises to the top, and we just kind of do it in order. And then everything that is super complicated and does nothing falls to the bottom, where we never see it again.
Great idea.
I was like, that's very developer based.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like very scientific. I love it.
Nice.
Wonderful. Anything else from you, Michael?
I think, yeah, somewhere in between these, basically a spreadsheet, keep track of feedback. We do not have any kind of, I think we've been more qualitative and less, we've done less attempt to quantify it and more just sort of like look at feedback that people have and make our own judgments about it. But yeah, pretty much spreadsheets.
Yeah.
So
I love spreadsheets, so I'm all about it. Yes, the balance between quantitative and qualitative is tough, but great to hear from all sides. Does our audience have any questions for these lovely panelists? Yes, Jake. I mean, stranger in the front row.
I have a couple questions. Some might be just speculation. I'm just curious what your opinions are, but I wrote them down because I won't forget them. But for the most part, do you consider App Lab just a means to an end where the ending would be eventually on the Oculus Store? Or is it just is that always the ultimate goal? Or do you think it's possible to have a satisfactory launch just purely being on App Lab? Just curious.
Yeah, so our goal from the get-go was to get on the Quest store, so we are actually Quest approved already. We are in a very rare situation because we were approached before we even started developing, and we created a pitch back when they required pitch decks and were accepted. So App Labs is a stopping point in between to get the game where it needs to be in order to get on the Quest store.
Yeah, I mean, kind of definitely it's a stopping point trying to get onto the official store. App Labs is an excellent way to collect feedback, but it's also a really good way to be able to tweak and toy with your system, especially your revenue model, because you can kind of experiment on a smaller group of players and see like what drives players to want to spend money on what, spend time on what, and make sure that you have all of that right, remove any kind of kinks in your funnel before you try to, go big time.
I have a question. So, all of you mentioned at some point you have to get in contact with the people at Oculus, and you mentioned that it's the sooner the better. But if I'm a developer and I have never don't know anyone inside, how do you get in touch with them?
LinkedIn. Ask people. Yeah. I mean, for us, I think LinkedIn was a way to find people.
I will say that we and I work with Amy, but we were in a different situation because they did approach us as a woman-owned business, which we appreciate. But just from going to GDC this year, there were a ton of Oculus people all over the place. So if you can, I know it's expensive, but if you can afford to set aside funds to go to a conference like that where you know they'll be there, in person, we got so much accomplished where, we've been sending emails back and forth for literally years, and being able to, knock things out in a matter of hours versus a matter of months is really impactful. So if any of those conferences where Oculus is going to be there on your radar, just LinkedIn, reach out to them ahead of time. They like to meet with developers. They want their developer network to grow. They were doing a session about getting on the store, and the Oculus was a sponsor, I think. And so, yeah, if any of those are on your radar or you're already attending, just see if anyone's going to be there because they seem to like meeting people in person.
I definitely had a lot of stepping stones before I actually got to an Oculus Pro, because I think I started as a consumer on SideQuest, and so I was in the SideQuest Discord, and then they mentioned that there was a SideQuest developer Discord, and so I joined that because I wanted to get on there. And then in there was a guy who claimed to be an Oculus Start mod, and he was telling people to join Oculus Start and gave out invites, and then I joined Oculus Start, and then I was able to get on App Labs through there, and then finally Oculus reached out to me. So it's definitely like there's a path you can take where you can kind of get on their radar, even if you're kind of coming from nothing.
Thank you so much for coming today, and I just want to give another round of applause for our amazing panel.